Do you find it hard to explain to friends and family what you now do? Are you wasting valuable time by attempting to figure out challenges on your own? We have created a community for ex-corporate people running their own business who want to live a life they love whilst giving back to their community. This is the Build, Live, Give show. We bring you first-hand experiences of guests going through many of the struggles you face each and every day. We get real with no corporate BS. And now your host, Paul Higgins.
Welcome to the Build, Live, Give show, episode number 30. I'm Paul Higgins and I'm your show host, and today I'm very excited to have Tim Farr from Entrepreneurial Accelerator. Tim started his corporate career in finance, similar to a lot of people listening to this podcast, and then he knew that he just was a round peg in a square hole. He knew that he wanted to take more control of his own destiny, and he actually left when he's just had a young child, and he had the backing of his wife, obviously, but it was a really risky moment, left and started a financial planning service. And that business just grew and grew, and he really got to understand how people make major life decisions and supporting them in making those decisions. And then last year he had a very successful exit at a young age again of that financial planning business. And now what he does is help entrepreneurs in the community that he's created called the Entrepreneurial Accelerator. Look, Tim just adds lots and lots of value. He's got some brilliant tips on how to scale a business in this podcast. It was great. I actually learned a lot of value. I got a lot of value out of listening to this myself. So please grab a pen and paper and be ready to capture some of these great tips. What's happening in the community? It continues to grow, so you can find out more at BuildLiveGive.com, and you can also go and check out our free closed Facebook group at Build, Live, Give. And really it's set up to help ex-corporate career people build a great business of their own, live a great life, and give back to the community. So enough from me. What we'll do now is hand over to Tim Farr from Entrepreneurial Accelerator. But before we dive into today's show, leaving corporate to run your own business can be extremely hard and lonely. You start off in a euphoric state, and at some point you look at your cash flow and start to doubt your abilities. What you learn in corporate doesn't always translate, and you are bombarded every day with new challenges. Learning something yourself is okay, but it can be both timely and costly. Friends and family want to help, but they don't have the specific experiences you need. This is why we created the Build, Live, Give community, a free community with hundreds of people just like you, answering questions and sharing real experiences, and definitely no spam. This, coupled with weekly interviews on hot topics, will help you expedite success. Search for the Build, Live, Give group in Facebook and answer the 3 questions to gain access. Anyway, enough from me. Now it's time to hand you over to one of the BLG members to hear their wonderful journey. Welcome, Tim Farr from Entrepreneur Accelerator to the Build, Live, Give show. So, Tim, I know a lot about you, and I know listeners today, BLG listeners, can't wait to hear more about you. But why don't you tell us a bit of your backstory?
Sure. Thanks for having me on your podcast today, Paul. It's an absolute honour to share some of my journey and hopefully provide some value to the guys who are listening to the session today. So for those who aren't familiar with me, just to give you a bit of a background, I, like most people in business, had a period of time where I was working as an employee. Most entrepreneurs make terrible employees. they tend to, they like to have the authority. They don't like being told what to do, and ultimately entrepreneurs generally love to have, control or influence in what they do, how they allocate their time, and control in the outcome as well. That's what drives us often to do those things in the first place. My situation was that I started in the wealth and wealth management space, looking after both pay-as-you-go employees and also business owners in actually managing their personal wealth. So a lot of what that was about was really figuring out where clients are now, where they want to be, and my job was to say, well, look, how do we get you there in the most efficient way, build some wealth along the way. A lot of the focus also during that time was saying, well, look, how do we create social outcomes, more than just money? And one of the funny things, Paul, you might laugh at this, but when I went into wealth management, my greatest concern was the job was actually going to be all about money, right, and simply just improving people's net worth. So it's quite interesting that you and I are having a chat about this today. But that was actually my biggest fear going into that industry. So look, after a period of time, the group was being closed down as a result of an exit of a key shareholder, and I was sort of forced in a situation where I had to go and fend for myself and grow the business from there. So Fairly scary proposition. Maybe some people listening now are in this situation, but we had our firstborn child. My daughter Chloe had just come along on the scene. She was a couple of months old, and I had to turn to my partner and say, "Hun, do you mind if I just jump ship with no security of income and see if we can make a go of it?" And to my surprise, I suppose not so much of a surprise now, but she said yes, and said, so we went for it, and the rest is history. So in the most recent time, having built that firm to around 600-700 clients, I actually exited from that business last year and have continued to focus on working with business clients on scaling and growing their business since.
Brilliant. And look, we'll certainly deep dive into that a little more. But what would the BLG listeners like to know about you outside of work? So something that your friends and family know about you that the community wouldn't.
Yeah, sure. So I suppose there's a few things that drive me. Whilst numbers tends to be all the logic side of the brain, I actually quite a visual and aesthetic person. So for many years I enjoyed photography at great expense. Often, but as I always say, it's a lot cheaper than many other hobbies or addictions. So,
yes,
I would love to say that I love sport or cycling as madly as you do, Paul, but unfortunately, I just can't get myself as motivated, mate, in that area as you can. But generally, that's where you'll find me, either exploring the bush or exploring the countryside, going to new places, travelling, and then capturing, the wonders around us. Is basically what we spend most of our time, of course, other than family and friends.
Great. And what sort of camera? What camera are you using at the moment?
Oh, mate, the shorter question would be what camera don't I have?
Yeah, okay.
But all of it's film photography, so I like to really punish myself. Do it using medium that's hard to get. I hand develop it, hand scan it, hand print it. Digital provides no sense of satisfaction when it comes to photography, unlike its use in many other areas of our business, like sales and marketing and task management. When it comes to that, I actually just want to get offline, go back to something that's quite physical. And I think the thing that probably drove me the most is in finance and numbers, whether you be working in the finance industry or even just in business, improving the numbers on a piece of paper eventually, isn't greatly satisfying and doesn't usually provide a sort of tangible, tactile, hold in my hand sort of thing at the end of the day. Whereas, something like that does. So it sort of satisfies both sides of the brain. But that's essentially me in a nutshell, mate.
All right, brilliant. And is there anywhere like publicly that people can see your photography, or is it
usually pretty
only?
Private? We share sometimes on Instagram and so forth. But
okay.
Having now exited the business last year, a lot of my time can be spent towards doing those things and reshuffling the priorities around. So probably more to come in the future, but mostly it's just to satisfy myself at this stage.
Okay.
In the future, I'd love to be able to use it to tell stories and I suppose show aspects of society that we don't often see. And look, I believe everyone has a story, like we're talking about now. Everyone's gone through a journey, everyone's unique. And being able to capture that in photography and be able to share someone's point of view or perspective is something that I greatly enjoy.
Excellent. And if you sort of go back to when you did leave and you spoke to Jo about, look, I'm going to go out on my own, and she was all thumbs up. What were some of the key fears that were you experienced at that particular time?
I think, growing businesses is sort of it's quite a similar experience to sort of jumping off the cliff and building a plane on the way down. As you're hurtling down the tens of thousands of feet at any one time. So I think there was two things. I suppose there was the unknown as to what the outcomes will be. But also something that I think is really helpful is determining right from the outset what degree of risk you're prepared to take. So if, being a numbers guy, I tend to think, well, look, what amount of time can our financials sustain without a certain amount of income? And really setting that as a hard line in the sand before you even make that jump. So just to give an example of that, okay, so maybe you've been made redundant, or maybe so you've come to business ownership either out of choice or been forced into it. It's being able to clearly articulate, well, look, how many months could I survive before I actually need to, potentially return to corporate or look at other options, and agree to what that window period of time is right from the very start. whether it be 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. The other thing I think is really key is being able to make changes quickly to your financial position. So whether that be your lifestyle, enjoy the good times when they're there, but also be prepared to flick the expensive stuff when the situation changes. So I think if you're prepared to do those two things and you can pull it off within a certain time frame, then you're in a good position to maybe consider that as an option. But definitely discuss that with your partner, get clear on what that number is or what that time frame is, and then everything you do is an unreasonable amount of effort to achieve that outcome before that time.
Yeah, I think it's great advice. I think you summed it up beautifully there around your partner, because often that lifestyle, and certainly from a male's perspective, often the money that's there in corporate is very attractive, and then the lifestyle changes. And personally, I found it absolutely liberating. I remember my first trip to Sydney. Once I was on my own coin, and I stayed in a $50 motel near the airport, which was incredibly dodgy, but I actually found it liberating that, I had to look at every cent, and I really, treated it like I was leaving uni again. It was completely different. And the only other advice, which I'm sure, Tim, you'll sort of back up, is, just be conservative in your estimates. I think if you're an entrepreneur, you're optimistic, you're out there, and, just sometimes without knowing it, you have commitments to your partner that just aren't realistic. And I certainly know in my case that was the case. So now I normally say to people, it's going to take 4 times the amount of time and about a quarter of the income, and you'll have it about right. What's sort of your view on that, given all the experience that you've seen?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the most easiest way to sort of surmount it in sort of corporate terms is to think when you start a new career, you don't expect to start on a 6-figure salary on your first month on the job, because you really don't know what you're doing, to be honest.
Yes.
Your remuneration comes from a period of time and experience and development. And it's exactly the same for business. I'm not sure why people think of it to be any different. It's the same thing. You put the training wheels on. You expect that you're going to take a pay cut, just like starting a new career. And over a period of time, you're going to be more effective, more efficient, be recognised for what you do, move from obscurity to recognition and influence. And as a result, your income will rise with it. So I think it's just really being clear about those expectations. And whether that be your own personal partner, or even if you partner with another business, like have a business partner, your time in your sort of risks and appetite and lifestyles could be quite different. So, you're going to make sure that if you're making the jump with someone else, that you've had that discussion and that they are aligned. And in all honesty, it adds another layer of complexity, because not only do you need to satisfy your life partner, but you also got to make sure that not just your values, but your time frames and everything else match up with your business partner as well, because they might jump ship before you're ready to, because of their own circumstances. And often I find breakdowns between business partners can be they've got different expectations, different appetites for risk, and different timeframes in which they need to be able to turn things around.
Yeah, no, that's golden advice. So if I sort of fast forward to today, if you walked into a networking event or someone asked you, so Tim, what do you do today? How would you answer that?
Well, generally as little as possible is what I generally try to do. But more importantly than that, I suppose what I do today is very similar to what I've always done. It's where are you now, where you want to be, and how do we get you from point A to point B, using my strength in respect to numbers, and turning really numbers into decisions, getting real clear about what it is I need to do and what order to get the result. Quite often that'll fall across a whole range of areas, which I'm sure we'll talk about in more detail. But it's really taking a business that's got to a certain point in its ceiling, like it's reached a ceiling and they've gone past that startup stage, they've gone into the growth stage, but they've sort of hit a wall in terms of revenue growth or their time in order to break through the next level, is generally the type of people we tend to work with.
Yeah, great. And so if someone said, well, what does Entrepreneur Accelerator do? What do they do for entrepreneurs? How would you answer that?
Yeah, so there's usually 3 problems that we tend to solve. It's time, team, and money. So I don't have enough time. Often that's an issue of managing of your resources and the documentation of your expertise. I don't have high-performing teams. So they either can't afford a team or they don't have a highly effective team that build the business for you. I think when you go into business, you tend to run with the mindset that I hate using the word mindset, but let's say the standard operating procedure is that you have to exert the effort to produce the result. In other words, you're responsible for building your business. However, what I find is the top 5% of entrepreneurs have recognised that they actually need to build people and build team who'll build the business for you. And that is a simple thing to say, but incredibly fundamentally different approach to building businesses. And one of those will succeed and one of those will only get so far. So a lot of our time is then on the second issue, and then of course the money. So having years of experience actually on the cash. A lot of people talk about actually generating profits in terms of coaching and mentors and the rest of it, but very few have actually ever handled the money or had to deal with the consequences of actually placing dollars anywhere in the business and what that means, either both in the business and also the impact to its shareholders. So they're really the three challenges that we seek to solve. And then the areas of improvement come across, sales, marketing, systemization, of HR and managing your finance in the business.
Yeah, excellent. Look, I do often have conversations with people around the difference between profit and cash flow. And I think, people just miss that. They look at their zero and they see their P&L and they think, oh, that's fantastic. And then they get a BAS quarterly bill or get some other thing that hits them out of left field and they're like, well, I've got no cash to actually pay for this.
Yeah, my accountant tells I'm doing wonderfully. I said, he says I'm doing great. And I look at my pockets and my bank and I go, I feel rubbish. So, what's wrong? There's a disconnect between what the numbers are and what the reality is. So look, that in a nutshell, that's essentially what we do. We get people high value leads, more leads, and build business models that enable them to work less. As I said, my goal is, but generate much higher revenue. Look, Paul, I think the best way to sort of sum it up is what I found in my experience is that it doesn't matter whether you're Tony Robbins or the Dalai Lama, there is really only 3 ways to improve business profitability. The first one is volume. You do more of the same stuff is one way of doing it. And most people take this approach. If I just do more leads, if I just do more sales, that will produce an improvement in profit. The second way that people go about business is reducing the cost. So I look to offshore my staff. I try and minimise and increase efficiency. That will improve results as well. But the most effective way to actually improve profitability in the business, and it's actually the most easiest, is actually increase price. So every time I look at someone's financials, we always do the comparison between doing more of it or a change to price. And the difference can be as radical as a 10% improvement in price could produce the same outcomes as an 80% increase in volume. So with my clients, I'll ask them to say, well, hey, Paul, which one would you want? Do you want to put your prices up by 10%? Or do you want to work 80% harder? Which one would you like? Yeah. And of course, most people say price. So yeah, of those 3 ways, volume, cost and price, the most effective means for an SME business, particularly if you're in the service-based space, is to increase price. Then the whole focus of what we do is say, well, look, how do we articulate that value? How do we justify that price? And how do we structure our services and offer in order to be able to demand not just a 10% increase? Many of our clients have a 500% increase in what they charge out to their clients. So they're much better paid, but they're not working any harder than what they did before.
Yeah, look, I think that's great. Brilliant advice. And I used to always say about our sales director at Coke only had one key decision he had to make each year, and that was his price rise. If he got his price rise right, then he could basically go to sleep for the rest of the year because it all flowed from there. And I think that's brilliantly summed up. About you and the way that you make your revenue, how do you make your revenue in your business? Yeah,
so I think a big part of it, I talked about changing business model, particularly with service-based businesses. For many years, we were a done-for-you model where we would actually execute and implement for clients, and that was great. However, what we've now moved to and done so successfully is a done-with-you model. So let me just give you an example of what that looks like. So in the past, if you want to improve your marketing results, most people would outsource that activity to an external agency. Okay, just as a sort of a limited example. But what we do instead is we actually teach people how to drive their own marketing and build that system within their business. For two reasons. One, they actually understand it. It's a bit like a mechanic. If you took your car to the mechanic and the mechanic says your piston's through your radiator and you didn't know any bit different, well, there's a good chance you're going to lose some money or not be able to, optimize your ROI. Whereas if you understand the car, you don't actually be the mechanic that fixes it. But if I understand how to drive it, what the numbers mean, the direction it needs to take, and who should be responsible at what price, then it's a skill set for life. And you've really taken back control, a key part of your business building system internally within your organisation. And then at some stage you might want to look to outsource it or bring someone else to manage it. But just to give you an example of that difference, that's not to say all agencies are bad. That's certainly not the point I want you to take away from it. But rather, I think there's a couple of skill sets that we should have as entrepreneurs. And besides all other things, the two things we should have is sales skill and marketing skills. Really, they are the two things in our business that's going to produce a lifting of the needle, and really should be about 80% of our allocation when it comes to our time management as the key shareholder in our business.
Yeah, look, I agree. And the only one as that goes down over time is obviously the leadership and people. I'm so surprised at how little amount of time small business owners put in leadership and into people versus what. So for a lot of listeners, the BLG community out here are ex-corporate, don't throw that away. So when you learn all those brilliant people skills in corporate, make sure as you're building your team, you're actually doing the same thing in your own small business.
Yeah, and a lot of it should be, well, look, how do I fund that role? So once I've got clear on what we do in our business, what are the roles that I need within the organisation to get the result, and then how do I attract, reward and retain the highest performing team members in our organisation? Look, Richard Branson's often brought up as a common example, but it's relevant in this example. Does Richard know how to fly a plane or run a finance company for credit cards or lawyers for a program or mobile network infrastructure? No, he doesn't personally know how to do that. What he does, though, is he's good at putting high-performing teams who are rewarded around him to build and grow the business for him, which is my earlier point. So, key focus as a director should be directing traffic, not on the tools and in the delivery of outcomes for your clients directly.
Great. And look, you've had a wonderful career, had an exit, you're continuing to help entrepreneurs. What's sort of been your biggest learning as you've gone through this amazing career of yours so far?
In what context, Paul? In respect to business experience?
Yeah, business.
Change and retired or?
I suppose business experience. So, if you think of BLG listeners that are sitting here and thinking, Tim is just articulating some great wisdom here, what sort of the key things that he could take out other than what he's already mentioned around, growing a business or scaling a business?
Yeah, sure. So, look, I think I have a fairly unique experience as a result of what I did corporately and then having exited out of the business. And that is I got to see people at a whole range of stages of life. Often most people, their experience of, say, retirement, for example, will be one and it'll be their own. But we helped 100 people retire over that period of time. We got to see thousands of people's the consequences of life decisions that they made throughout their personal and also their business career and what that meant about the options they had available down the road to them. So I think, what to take away from that is really getting clear on actually what you want, much more beyond the money, because what I found and what I was trying to say in respect to people in different situations is there's the people who have and there's people that have not. And most people who have not work and focus and bury themselves, particularly entrepreneurs, into their work, often doing more volume, as I said, to try and get ahead, on the premises that once they do, everything will be great. Like whatever that number is, once I get $100,000 in revenue, everything will be wonderful. Once I've got $1 million in revenue, everything will be wonderful. It doesn't matter what that number is, but there always seems to be some sort of magic number that people have. So I think the most important thing to take away from it is, I can tell you, having worked with the guys who've got those magic numbers and well above, is the the problem never really goes away. So if we looked at, say, a singular issue of, say, cash flow, if you're expecting that by the time you've got $1 million, you've solved all your cash flow problems, guess what? Well, let's have a conversation once you get to $1 million, and or $4 million or $10 million, because all that happens is the numbers get bigger and the risks get bigger with it. So I think the biggest lesson I've had from that is you need to be actually comfortable with being uncomfortable. You need to not expect the release of managing cash flow and people and clients. You need to get comfortable with mastering that instead.
Yeah, I think
as opposed to this lofty notion that things will all be better once I get to this magic point. So in doing that, don't do things just for financial outcomes, because once you get there, I can tell you it won't be satisfied. And you know what, have a guess at what the magic number is I've found, Paul, that most people sort of end up saying I've got more than I ever need or should want for more.
On an annual basis, or is it a total?
Well, okay, very good question, because, okay, I'll come to that in a moment, but let's talk lump sum. Okay, let's talk cash flow first, and then we'll talk about lump sum.
Well, I heard the other day, someone told me it's 23 to 28 times your annual expenses is where you should have enough to retire on.
Yep. So as a lump sum, that's probably about right. In terms of dollar terms, most people, if I ask most people and they're being honest, and assuming the house has been paid or their living circumstances are under control, right? Most people are very happy with $10,000 a month in passive income. Now, I'll qualify that by talking about passive income. So this is money that I haven't had to go to work for.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a lot of people earning a lot more, but if the business is relying on them producing revenue or operationally, then there's a very good chance they actually don't have $10,000 net to their bank account after tax that is passive and didn't require their own personal exertion. So yeah, so the number that we actually need is far less than many people would try and sell you that you should have or do need. The real trick is building recurring income that doesn't require the same 9 to 5 or many 60, 80 hours a week to achieve that outcome. And if you offer that to most business owners, even with very established businesses, most of them probably jump at the chance to be able to have 10 grand coming in a month, and they've got all their time back. So the time is actually more important than the dollars.
Yes.
And the incredible thing that happens is once you get to that point, you actually get an opportunity to think about, well, how is it that I want to spend my time? What's more important? How do I give back socially? How do I achieve the things that I want for my family, as opposed to making all those compromises around our time and around our family in order to start a business that many people do, but never stop compromising on 5, 10, 15 years later.
Yeah, look, that's brilliant advice, really well summed up. And I think for a lot of people leaving corporate, I think that gives them a great goal to achieve, because this community is about build, live, give, and it's about living that great life and giving back. Yeah. I think, as you said, if you can get a business that generates good passive income for you, then you can do the other two, which is in many cases more the goal, and not get caught up on the dollars. So brilliant point. Now, if I just forward a little to your partner, Jo. So I know Jo's sort of supported you through this journey. If she was listening to this podcast, what would you say to her?
Look, I think, there's some people who've gone to business without the support of their partner, but I think it is it's a decision that has an impact on every facet of your life. Your time, your lifestyle, your money, and I think you really are up with an uphill battle unless you've got a very supportive person with you to go through the peaks and troughs that come with business. So look, I've been incredibly fortunate that I've got an incredibly supportive partner. That's not for good planning on my part, but rather just being pretty fortunate and finding my soulmate pretty early on. And someone who backs you every step of the way, because often in business, you often find you're in the trenches sort of chucking grenades out at life, and customers and legal issues, and you know what I mean? So I think you really need someone by your side, whether it be, your partner or a good mentor, or paid help in the form of coach, where someone's just a little bit further down the road than you. They don't have to be number one, and I certainly wouldn't profess to be number one, There's certainly a lot of things I've learnt, and it's certainly a lot of things that are further down the road in some areas than others that can be of benefit to them. And it's the whole premises of what we do. But yeah, I think without that support, then you at some stage, when you've compromised your health, your finances, and your relationships, unless you actually are really intentional about maintaining those, one of those three things is going to break at some point in your entrepreneurial journey, unless you actually are mindful of fixing it. So coming back to the original point, if you don't have the support of your partner, if they're not on board, I think you're going to have a really tough time. Do they need to be involved in every aspect of the business? No. Do they need to understand exactly what you do? No. But having someone in the trenches who's there to listen and cheer you on through those peaks and troughs, and as you pivot the business multiple times over a period of time, it's great to have someone who's there for you, and I'm very fortunate to have that person.
Excellent. Big shout out to Joe. So the next section is the live section. And what are some of the daily habits that you do that help you be successful as you are?
Okay, so look, I think a lot of it comes from personal experience. The three things that break often for business owners is it's either their health, it's their relationships, or the money gives out, as I just mentioned. So for me, I actually personally experienced one of those three things. And when I talk about them, I talk about it from first-hand experience. For me, it was my health. Thankfully, it wasn't my relationship or the dollars, but it certainly was my health. So in my case, I think a lot of what I do now is driven by the fact of how can I make sure that those priorities are at the forefront of what I do? How can I have a business model that gets me closer to my goals? And every decision that I make is asking myself, well, does this get us closer to where we want to? If I'm going to do billable hours and that's my business model, aren't I not just tying myself to a desk? Because unless I am at a desk working those hours, I can't bill. So they're the sort of things that I suppose daily influence my decision making and process. And to that aim, I'm very mindful of managing my health and sort of personal exertion throughout the day. Whether that be visiting the beach, whether that be going take the camera in the bag, or just spending some time with family and friends and just managing those energy levels. Because if you've been in business for a while, you expend a lot of energy, and you can do that for a period of time. But particularly if you're single, you can usually pull that off for a lot longer and a lot more. But once the family comes on the scene, there's a real fundamental shift in trying to balance those things. So for me, that's probably the sort of things that I do on a regular basis to impact some of the decision making.
Yeah, great. And look, I think for a lot of people listening to this, and it's becoming, as you said before, it's nearly an overplayed term now, the mindfulness, but it is both mental and physical health. I think a lot of focus was always on the physical, but I think there's some great technologies, and we've got some clients we're supporting at the moment. We're really starting to look at the mental health side of either being in corporate, and I think a lot of people escape or run from corporate because of that mental exhaustion. But what you realise is, it's actually it's still a pressure in your own small business, and in some cases it's even more so. So I think having a good community and a network and support can definitely help, so that you're not doing it on your own, and listening to people like you giving great advice as you have so far is something that can definitely help. Look, the next section is around the give section. So I know you support some great causes. What are a couple of causes that you'd love to mention that you support?
Yeah, sure. So I think for me, as I said, the money is only one part of the equation. There's so much you can do in marketing, sales, and niche, and team, and systems, and Podio. I might throw that in there for you, Paul. All that sort of stuff. There's only so much you can do that, and after a period of time, you end up sort of chasing the wind. So I think with that aim and a lot of the focus, remember I said that the biggest concern I had going into wealth management was that it was just about making people better off, and people already had money, giving them more money. For me, that was a fairly hollow aim. So a lot of the focus tends to be is, money is the means to an end. Money is that, we operate in an economy. We need to have dollars in exchange of goods and food and all those sorts of things. But yeah, really, it's how do we spend that? What are we actually aiming towards? And if you look at the massive disproportionate distribution of wealth globally. Don't quote me on the statistics, but it's a fairly staggering small percentage own and control, in excess of 80% of the assets and the resources in the world. If you've got running hot water at home right now, you are in a very small percentage of the population, even just running drinking water. So I think with that aim in mind, then, the biggest issues, I suppose, for me is a lot of the social injustice, particularly around the treating of kids. As a parent, if you haven't had kids, you just realise how vulnerable they are and how much they need to have support systems around them in order to survive and thrive. So with that aim in mind, I serve and use some of my financial skill sets with a non-for-profit, and we support, certain programs like Compassion, which is sort of like the Christian version of World Vision in terms of the aims that they're looking to achieve globally. So look, probably the interesting question, it's quite timely you asked this question, is having now exited the financial planning firm last year, having now got it back a large chunk of time, they're the sorts of things I'm working through and saying, well, look, what does this next phase look like for me? Do I go and serve on a non-for-profit board, or what sort of level of contribution I make? One point that's worth making too, Paul, is a lot of people try and achieve business outcomes by providing social outcomes. So their whole business model is about social, might be around social justice or giving, and that is a very noble cause. But a lot of discussions I tend to have with my clients is, how much better placed are you to give or to contribute in both financially and monetary if you've got a business that's thriving and creating financial outcomes? So instead of having your whole business model wrapped around providing social outcomes that it's hard to monetize, there is nothing bad about running a for-profit business in an area that will generate income and then using that income to do much more social good than you would otherwise achieve. So they're a lot of discussions we tend to have with our clients is, let's get a functioning business and then let's free up time in order to go and give much more back than what you can achieve by trying to run something on a social non-for-profit basis. If you can't feed yourself, you're not in a great space to be able to feed others, in a nutshell.
Yeah, look, and I think that's perfect alignment with our name. Build, live, give is all around that, what you just described. So look after you and your family first, and live a great life with them, and then the third element is the give component. So I think it's spot on. And for a lot of people out here that have just left corporate and you're really starting to build your business, and you might be feeling a little guilty that you're not doing more from a cause perspective, you'll get there. So be patient, look after yourself first, get that right, and then when things are successful and you get that recurring income like Tim mentioned, then you can certainly look a lot more on the cause component. And the only other thing I'll say just briefly is that we had a Facebook Live session with Paul Dunn from B1G1, and you can give a percentage of your revenue to some great causes whilst you're building the business as well, without being actively involved. And there's other options out there as well. But B1G1 is a good supporter of Build, Live, Give, and I think that's a great option.
Absolutely. Even giving up your staff time is a good example of doing that as well. So you might pledge your team to be able to go and do some short-term projects of some description, or time for them to go and serve in the areas that they're passionate about. So there's a lot of other ways to do it. I think just where people get stuck is they try and build a social business, like a socially just business is one example of socially conscious business, and end up struggling because they can't monetize it. So I think, it really comes down to, how do I generate a business? How do I put myself in a position of strength? How do I invest in myself, in my team, with a greater aim of being able to serve others in a far greater capacity than I would be able to otherwise.
Excellent. Fantastic. Now, what we'll do is do the action section now. It's where I'll ask you a quick question. If you can just give a rapid fire answer to these questions to give great action for the BLG community.
Sure.
So first is around personal productivity. What's your number one personal productivity tip?
Manage your energy and your time. Working more hours does not produce a better result. It's actually sometimes better to stop, rest, come back the next day and be far more efficient in that exercise by taking time off. So it sounds counterintuitive, but actually be conscious of taking time off, and the time you are working, you'll be much better.
Excellent. As Covey used to say, sharpen the saw. The apps. So what are some of the favourite apps?
Okay, so I've got a whole range of apps. I'm a bit of a nerd like yourself, Paul. So, I have to stop myself playing from the toys sometimes. But look, there's some core ones we use in building businesses. ClickFunnels is a great example of the marketing pages and building assets very, very quickly. On the CRM side, I'm a big fan of ActiveCampaign, particularly after being on Confusionsoft for so long.
Yes.
And then on the task management side, you can't go wrong with either an Asana or a Teamwork PM. And look, I've seen Paul do some incredible things with Podio, so I'm sure there's nothing that thing can't do in the right hands. So I haven't talked to Paul about that.
Excellent, brilliant. Thanks for the plug. So, favourite podcast or a couple of podcasts that you love to listen to get knowledge for your community?
Yeah, so I tend to search on topics rather than follow, I suppose, key people. Is generally an approach I tend to take. But look, I think when I'm looking for ones, I'm just trying to find people who are in a similar stage, who are trying to achieve a similar result. As you get bigger in business, a lot of stuff tends to be quite tactical. How do I do this? How do I do that? A lot of things that the podcasts I enjoy following tends to be sort of more strategic and focused, and also a lot on the personal side as well. So how do you manage your leadership? How do you manage your team? And I'll certainly be signing up to this podcast, Paul, when it gets released, I believe, live today.
Excellent. Well, actually, it'll be well and truly live by the time your episode comes out. But so hopefully you'll be giving some 5-star ratings well and truly prior to that. The advice, look, you've given so much advice in this podcast. I've truly enjoyed listening, and I've learned a lot through what you've been saying. But what's your parting piece of advice that you'd love to give the BLG listeners?
Yeah, sure. So I think, look, on the business side, that point about building people and your time and energy investing in good people is really the best way to build high-performing and profitable businesses that actually get the thing you want. When people go to business, I want more time freedom, more location freedom, and lifestyle freedom. And if you don't try and build that from the very start of your business, it's very, very difficult to create that much later on. So certainly start your business journey with that in mind. If you already have, then it may require some breaking of the eggs to make the cake. And that's what we do in our program, is figure out the 5% that needs to change to create those results. On the personal side, look after yourself. Someone who went through a major health scare, sitting in a cardiac ward in your 30s is quite a frightening experience. So having done that the wrong way, the good news is I know better ways to go about it. But yeah, look after yourself. The thing you can't replace without any amount of money is your time, your family, and your health. So build businesses that will actually get you closer to that goal at every step of the decision-making process.
Brilliant. Great advice, Tim. And finally, how can people find out more about you?
So look, jump on the website, entrepreneuraccelerator.com.au. The way we work is we have a chat about your business. So if you want to reach out, have a discussion about where you're at, where you want to be, and if it sounds like I'm someone who's aligned to what you want to achieve, then I'm more than happy to figure out, what tangible ROI we can produce and whether we can solve some of those key problems we've talked about today.
Brilliant. So, look, I really want to personally thank you, Tim. I know we've worked together closely over time, and I've learned a lot more from you today. And as I said, I thoroughly enjoyed your words of wisdom, and I'm sure the BLG community have also enjoyed your words of wisdom. And, we love having you in the community and want to continue to work with you. So thanks for coming on today, and I wish you all the success in the future.
Absolute pleasure, Paul. Thank you very much. Love what you're doing.
Great. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you for listening to the Build, Live, Give show. If you found this show helpful, please share it with others so we can build businesses, live great lives, and give back to the community. If you would like to join the BLG community, go to our website, www.buildlivegive.com. Until next time, thanks for listening.